Hello and welcome to the after party, where the flag still flies high over our embattled redoubt. I'm No White Guilt, and with me, a hero recently censored from YouTube and wearing that attack as a medal on his chest, the mentally refulgent Great Order. I want to get started by spotlighting Anne, who continues to work diligently on all of our downloads and changing them into podcast form. I also want to spotlight Julie for making our holiday banners, which contributes to our feeling of community. And I want to thank Gary for his recent investment and stylish hat he recently sent to me in the mail. Let's get a big round of raucous emojis and applause for these folks. I thank you all. Now, appearing on the honors roll call today is Janice, DB Cooper, Ryan, Matthew, Emily, Evelian, Wayne, Scott, Gregory, Albertus, Andrew, our very own Dainty Brighton, David, L, and P, Elaine Sabatino, Fiona, Inquipper, and an extra special thanks to Laura, the good girl, Sam, Jay, and Luke. I warmly appreciate all of your support, and I'm most grateful that there are people like yourselves who are driven by a golden character and sense of destiny. Your investments will enable me to continue to spread this curative contagion despite the mounting efforts of the anti-whites to censor this work into oblivion. As for the Super Chat crown winner of last week, the crown goes to Bam Bam for investing a total of 55 life-saving dollars. Congratulations. Congratulations, good sir. In second place was Mr. Cole, who invested $45. Congratulations and thank you as well. Super Chat, as always, on YouTube, or drop down into the video's description for a familiar alternative. Jared and I evenly share the Super Chats with our guests here on the after party. Before we proceed to the important topic of this episode, I want to briefly say that yesterday we saw another wave of anti-white censorship sweep across YouTube and potentially some other platforms as well. The targets of this censorship are those who are not anti-white. The few anti-whites who were censored were done so for plausible deniability. Any objection to that reality is an admission of childlike stupidity. The particulars of this specific wave of censorship are irrelevant. The reason for the censorship is that anti-whites have lost the debate of ideas. They have lost the debate of fairness. They have lost the debate of philosophy. They have lost the debate of legality. They have lost the debate. And so the only tool left to them is naked oppression, which is what they always and always will resort to. Starting and operating a channel or similar endeavor is, for most of us, a labor of love. It is hardship. It is sacrifice. It is countless hours of life, time, and effort that cannot be recalled and lived again. People like my colleagues, Jared George and Patrick Slattery, had those hours of life deleted by the anti-white bastards. A greater man than myself once said that when democracy fails to give the anti-whites what they want, they always resort to the blackjack. That is a metaphor, for now, of all forms of social, psychological, economic, and physical terrorism that the anti-whites inflict on heretics. But there's more behind this censorship than our heresy, our growing might, and the infernal objectives of anti-whiteism. The horror visited on our people in South Africa grows by the day. The anti-whites know that if they do not hang us by the neck, many millions of our people around the world will learn about this bestial and monstrous white erasure. And when they do, they will wonder why nothing has been said by the regime, why nothing has been done by the regime. And then, and this is what the anti-whites dread most, these millions will see the same butchery, the same bloody end for themselves as we now witness in South Africa. And then a panicked fire will be lit within them, a fire that the anti-whites won't be able to douse. Today's episode of TAP is dedicated to Annette Kennealy. Annette was a South African woman and a hero. She ardently spoke out against white erasure in Africa, which she and many others refer to as farm murders. Tragically, she suffered the same grisly fate at the hands of the anti-whites that she tried to warn the world about. Annette dared to love in a world that called her love hate. She dared to care in a world that called her concern hate. She dared to protect in a world that calls the protection of our people hate. And for that, the anti-whites butchered her. And for that, anti-whites in the government shrugged their shoulders. And for that, anti-whites in media and academia applauded. By stark contrast, we condole with Annette's family and friends. She was our daughter, our sister, our cousin, our aunt, our wife, and our mother. In her memory, Jared and I have invited Traditional Mike and Boer Republic to appear on TAP so that we could remember Annette, discuss what is taking place in South Africa, and also discuss the South African effect that is spreading across the West. And let's coin this here today. The South African effect is the indifference at best, celebration at worst, by the centers of power in response to harm of all kinds inflicted on Western kind. The denial of our right to speak, associate, assemble, the theft of our property and land, and the beatings, the rapes, the disfiguring, and murders. The South African effect is a phrasal tool. As a phrasal tool, will bring attention to both what is happening to our people in South Africa and what has happened to us all across the West. Before I introduce our guests, let us have a moment of silence for Annette and all the other members of our people who have been recently and brutally murdered by anti-whites. Thank you. Today we are going to get tapped into Traditional Mike and the Boer Republic. Beginning with Traditional Mike, he is a content producer operating a YouTube channel of the same name. Mike hails from Australia, and he has been in the movement for traditionalism and white well-being for a number of years, collaborating with many others in those efforts. He is particularly passionate for the cause of our people in South Africa and has used his social media connections to raise awareness of their persecution and suffering. He is well known for his heroism as the voice and living memory of Kayla Meyer, a beautiful little girl who had her life monstrously extinguished by anti-whites. He has now also contributed his love and his voice to Annette Kennealy, and we are honored to have him with us today. We are also joined by Odendal and Siener from the Boer Republic, which is an alt media project dedicated to bringing attention to solutions for the current predicament that our people face in South Africa. Their emphasis is on solutions and aiding to bring worldwide attention to the South African reality. Odendal and Siener are two ordinary Afrikaner gents, not affiliated with any organization, but they are passionate about a future where our people in South Africa can practice self-determination. Boer Republic is self-funded. They host a podcast, do documentary work in order to wake their countrymen, and show the world the inspiring, hardy, and resilient spirit of the Boer people. It is our great pleasure to have these gentlemen with us today, but before we get started with them, I would like Jared to speak on the deletion of his channel, his thoughts, emotions, and what is next for him. I know the actions taken against white well-being and against him personally yesterday have further inflamed the warrior spirit within this great man. Jared, I pass it to you.
Well, thank you, Jason. But do you mind if maybe I keep everyone in suspense? And I want to get right to Mike and Boer Republic, and maybe I can speak a little bit to what's going on later. But obviously, the main testament is that 24 hours later, I'm here. Work goes on. The wheels continue to grind. And I'm actually feeling energized. When you're on the path that you're supposed to be on and something like this happens, it just energizes you. But I'll speak more to that later, if you don't mind. I know you gave that nice introduction, Jason, and we were planning to have me say a few words. But I feel I want to get to traditional Mike and Odendal and Siener here and speak about South Africa and Annette. So maybe we'll pepper in some of my thoughts about what happened later. Certainly, I just want to say I do appreciate all the love and support from around the world. I'm catching up on messages. I'll get to yours if I haven't gotten to you yet. And we'll have more opportunity to talk about it at other times. Obviously, I want to keep the focus of this episode on South Africa, on Annette as a memorial. I lost a social media platform, but Annette lost her life. So in the grand scheme of things, we know what the priorities are. But yes, I'm happy to talk about that, but maybe there'll be a point in the show later where I could maybe speak about it for 5 minutes. But why don't we welcome our guests? Jason's given them the introduction. So Mike, we've spoken to you before. It was back in February. We welcomed you, and now you're back on the after party in Australia, but a big advocate for South Africa. And why don't we start by just speaking a little about who Annette was before we get into details about her gruesome murder and memorialize her a little bit more, and then, of course, open it up into a wider conversation with all of us about South Africa. She was someone who was a farmer and an activist, someone who was an artist and had a great spirit. You could see in the pictures shared of her online that she just had this joy and this mischief about her. So why don't you just tell us a little bit what you know, what you convey about Annette?
Hello, guys. Thank you very much for having me back on the program. It's good to be with you all, unfortunately, under unpleasant circumstances. Yes, she was certainly a very passionate individual, very patriotic Afrikaner. She studied fine art in Pretoria, and she loved art and she loved her people, and she always wore her heart on her sleeve. I didn't have the unfortunate pleasure of meeting her, I should say, but I've been speaking with one of her friends through Twitter, through one of my contacts, and she was the most caring and kind individual. She was extremely genuine. She wore her heart on her sleeve, and she had a fantastic sense of humor. She seemed like a very nice individual. As I said, I didn't know her personally, but through association to others, I have gotten to know her, and I've taken that information and put it through the socials for people to remember her.
Oh, and let me just say something in the chat. A little bit of housekeeping. That really is me with a picture of the Austrian Alps in the avatar that says Jared. Some people were wondering, want to make sure there aren't imposters. This is not an account I'm starting a new YouTube presence from. It's just a temporary account that I'm chatting from. We'll see if I start a new YouTube channel. But for the purposes, you'll see I'm a blue chat mod, and that is me. I did promise them I would say that so that they know it's not an imposter. So now that that's out of the way, yeah, she was an activist. She was a farmer in a community called Limpopo, if I'm saying that correctly. So she was murdered on her farm, and an employee was with her at the time. Do we have evidence that she was targeted because of her activism? Could you speak a little more about that if you know anything?
I do know that an employee of hers was a person of interest in the investigation and has been arrested and brought before a court. I believe there's an upcoming court date in the next week or two, I think, to further that case. I don't know any more particulars in regards to that. And obviously would not want to speak too much because it is a legal matter, of course.
Of course, yeah. Yeah, there were some pieces up, and it was a man named Kenny Ramatswana, is 40 years old. He's from Maluma village. He faces the charges of murder and house robbery. And unfortunately, prepare yourself, won't get too graphic, but there were several wounds to her head, stab wounds, a hammer and iron pipe were found next to her body, which was covered in her own blood. So a very upsetting image painted there of this woman who was again, not only a farmer, but herself an activist. That adds a whole new level to it, of course. And someone who, from some of the things Mike shared, we are seeing may have been, looked like she shared a post of mine where I was sharing Born Guilty, Jason's book, of course. So we have word that it looks like she was aware to some degree of our work, which makes it, of course, it hits a little closer to home. Not that her knowing us or not knowing us changes the gravity of the situation one iota, of course, but it just does bring it that much more closer to home, that people who are perhaps in our audience that are fighting for this with us are suffering the gravest consequences. Why don't we, as we continue to talk about this, speak with Odendel and Ziner from Boer Republic. Guys, welcome. I know you haven't been on tap yet, but we did get the opportunity to speak on Mark Collette's channel. I had come back briefly for a couple of weeks in October and happened to catch you guys there. So it's the first time you're on tap, but it's not the first time that we are speaking. So Odendel, why don't you start and just say hello and tell us. We're going to talk generally about South Africa, of course, as we did last week with Simon Roche, but anything that you'd like to say about the Annette case, or if you're in South Africa, so the degree to which it's being covered there, that people are aware of this. Are there so many murders like this now that they just get swept under the rug, that it's just a white noise at this point? What is the news cycle like there?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for allowing us the opportunity to speak on your show. You're right, it is the first time we're on tap, and it's quite an honor. We really enjoyed discussing South Africa on Mark Collette's channel last year in depth, and it was a great discussion. And it's great to finally also be speaking with you, Mike. And we look forward to a great discussion. First of all, the Annette Kennealy case, the specific area in which she was murdered is outside of a town called Louis Trichardt, which is in the Limpopo province. So to give you an idea, South Africa is divided up into a whole bunch of provinces. And this is in one of the more northern regions of South Africa. The case itself, from what we aren't close to that vicinity, so we don't have any specific close connection to it. But this is by no means an isolated case. The one thing that I can say for sure that, you know, Jason talked about this earlier in the show, that there seems to be media silence on many of these cases, if not all of them. And if they do get touched upon, then there is very little detail. There is very little attention being spared or spread on the issue at large. And you've got quite a few individuals. You spoke to Simon Roche, for instance, who was able to discuss at length regarding the situation in South Africa. And in this case, and I spoke to Sina earlier about this, and, you know, we're doing this show for Annette Kennealy, but there are so many names, there are so many people that whose names have been swept under the rug. We can discuss there's a few options, or there are a few people and instances that have been murdered, have been attacked within the last month, within the last week, for instance. And not to draw attention away from Annette Kennealy, but there's just one small thing that I want to mention. Or it's not small by any means, but it's relevant, because AfriForum, a civil an organization dedicated to raising awareness of minority rights specifically, on one of their representatives' Twitter page, Ian Cameron, the Twitter handle is Ian Cameron 23, at Ian Cameron 23. He usually has the most up-to-date farm attacks that occur. And on his Twitter page, as it stands, on the 5th of June 2019, outside of Louis Trichardt, Limpopo, the same area where Annette was murdered, there was a farm attack. Although no if you don't mind me quickly reading it to you, 5th of June 2019 occurred in Louis Trichardt, Limpopo. Victim heard footsteps in the house and was confronted by two attackers armed with a knife. Victim's arms and legs were cut, and he was hit over the head with a blunt object. Cash stolen. The South African Police Service was on scene, and no arrests. So that's just to give you an idea of, and it's unfortunately a very brutal image, and we apologize for any sensitive listeners, but this is the reality we face. Attacks are brutal, attacks are planned, and attacks are by no means an accident or due to socioeconomic circumstances. This is usually ideologically driven, if I can put it in such a large nutshell. The other aspect to it, though, with Annette Kennealy, which I think is very important to mention, is that many people who do speak out on farm murders, on attacks, and that is quite the sacrifices that go into this is phenomenal. Many people give up so much of their time, and in this case, it cost lives. So I thank you so much for taking the time to bringing attention to such an important issue.
Yeah, and thanks for that. I'd just like to add a little bit, and again, thanks for having us on the show. It's always great to be here. Just to get some narrative for the listeners, just to give a bit of background as to how many farm attacks generally happen. This year so far, you have generally about 20 to 30 attacks per month. And if we look at last month, the month of May, it's about 51 attacks across the country. This is farm attacks, mostly happening in Gauteng province, which is sort of next to Limpopo. And basically that brings the tally up to about 148. So that just gives people a kind of sense of how many of these attacks happen, and that it is generally getting worse. Obviously, there's a lot of controversy with regards to the numbers, if it's getting worse or not. Generally, we don't always believe the police reports, and for obvious reasons. But just to add some narrative to that.
Thank you. And anyone, go to my Twitter and when you can, and someone named Rapture Remembered shared a beautiful picture of Annette. I'd seen a few, but this is captures some of the beauty of the landscape as well. So I just shared that. But anyway, I think one of you on Boer Republic, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe it was another account. I certainly was on Twitter a little bit more than usual last night and today, given everything that happened, had said something to the effect of, we'll know that we have the culture back when we have the memorials and the monuments back. There's a lot to that symbology of those who control the memorials, the statues, the symbols, and the culture. And one of the first videos that I've made, which you can still find on BitChute, which I guess I'll link to, one of my very first was something called Build the Wall. And it's just hearing you speak about this, and whether it was you or someone else, just tell me in a moment, had made this tweet about memorials and monuments and writing names. Build the Wall video, of course, people might click on it thinking that I was going to talk about Trump and the southern border in the United States, but it was actually called Build the Wall in Europe. And of course, I was focusing on tragedies in Europe at the time, but the same could be said of anywhere in the Western world, in European civilization. And that is, I'd like to imagine a world one day, maybe I'll live to see this, maybe I won't, but at least set the groundwork for something like this becoming a reality one day, where we have something like the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C. If anyone's familiar with that, most Americans will be, at least. It's a wall where all the names of the deceased veterans from that conflict are on this wall. It's a low wall you walk by in Washington, D.C. And I want things like that for the victims of the truck attacks in Stockholm, in Paris. I want things like that for the victims of the sex grooming rings in the UK, or perhaps in something sensitive like that, if the women were still alive and they didn't want their names shared for privacy reasons, and there could be a moniker or something like this. But we need these symbols, certainly for all of the deceased in South Africa, all of these gruesome, horrific farm murders, that one day there will be a memorial, because that's our way of controlling the symbols, controlling the narrative, controlling the direction of where people's attention is in the society. The fact that we see continually our symbols being eroded, statues being taken down. People get upset about this not only because of this statue might be a person who is a folk hero to them or someone they look up to. I think that even those among us who might not be thinking this through consciously, thinking it through on the deepest levels, their instincts are right. Their compass is pointed in the right direction, because they know that this means we're not in control. Our control has slipped. Meanwhile, we're told that we have privilege, right? And we can't be racist because we have power. It's just a bald lie, and it's insane. And the fact that statues and symbols are being taken down are the very testimony to that fact that we're not. But this is one of the reasons why I work, and this is one of the visions I ask you to join me in seeing, that we will see beautiful monuments, memorial walls in stone, and all kinds of new architecture and art that will come from our genius again, that commemorate all the people who needlessly died and suffered at the hands of all of these lies. This is a lie that's being told to us about how society is supposed to go, and that there's some inevitable arrow of history pointing towards this great mix and this utopian vision that we're being sold in media and in school. So I don't know if it was you guys who said it or not, but the person whoever tweeted that, I thank them, and I thank you for reminding me of my old video, Build the Wall. One day we'll have these memorials back, and Annette's name will be on it, like many others. And that's why I get up every day. I know that's why Jason and Mike and Odendahl and Zener, excuse me, get up every day. Was it you guys or was it someone else who had said that on Twitter?
Well, to be honest, I think most people who speak out about South Africa do mention in large about the destruction of our heritage, of our language, of our history, and in a very large part regarding our monuments, since that is a stark reminder of our history, heritage, and language. So there's one specific instance that we did tweet out last year that is similar to what you are mentioning. And it was a picture of a mural dedicated to the Anglo-Boer War from 1899 to 1902. And this specific wall is situated in a city called Bloemfontein. Essentially means flower fountain. Don't let the name fool you, though. But the wall itself, it's just a small wall in as part of a monument dedicated to Emily Hobhouse, who cared for the victims of concentration camps. And this specific wall that we did tweet out was a photo that we took while we were traveling. And specifically, it says, vryheid, volk en we made at that stage was about for us to embrace our history, our culture, and essentially that our future lies in remembering our past, because at the moment our future is slipping out of our hands. What we've done also is made a huge effort behind the scenes as well as on camera to bring attention to a few monuments that have been affected. One of which is, if I can just provide a quick background, first of all, here in South Africa, we had an issue with the Cecil John Rhodes statue at UCT, University of Cape Town. If I'm not mistaken, although Sinner might have a better recollection of that incident, but the idea behind that was that this was a statue of a colonizer, an oppressor, despite bringing education to that section of the country, or making huge emphasis on it, and I'm not going into the sort of history behind Cecil John Rhodes. I mean, there's lots to say about him also, but there was a huge protest that occurred, and it spread worldwide. It became the Rhodes Must Fall protest. In a similar way, on the university grounds close to where this specific image was that I just mentioned, and I will just quickly retweet it so that those who are following can see on Twitter. But the university grounds close to where this statue, this picture was taken, there's a statue of old Free State States President Martinus Tianus Steyn, MT Steyn. And there specifically, it became a new question or a repetition of this must fall protest. And then it became Steyn must fall. And this statue was, for instance, targeted by various ideologues, groups like the Economic Freedom Fighters, which is a cultural Marxist, hardcore communist group, as well as many other students who feel that the statue oppresses them. Very similar to the question of Southern heritage, of statues and history being removed because it offends someone. It's very similar to what you find overseas, and in many cases, we've been experiencing this for a while before things like the Unite the Right rally and the events surrounding that came to the fore. What's been happening over here is statues and cultural icons have either been desecrated, broken down, or removed. Often, if they do survive or if they do stay intact, they get moved to safer locations. In this case, the statue of President M.T. Steyn will be moved to a safer location, according to the people on the ground there. This specific statue will be moved to the Anglo-Boer War Museum, where it will be safe. And the Anglo-Boer War Museum itself was set up by President M.T. Steyn many, many years ago. So just to give an idea of that small background, but this is something that we face regularly. A very basic example is also simple name changes. A name usually says a lot. It talks about history. It talks about not only the culture, but often the language in which the name comes from, the area and the context. So there are many issues or many inherent ideas contained within a name. I mean, it's one of the ways to kill an idea is to take away its power, and sometimes a name contains quite a bit of power. So what happens is in many of our cities, street names are changed, city names are changed, monument names are changed, and landscape names are changed. These are things that serve as warning signs to essentially the decimation of our history, of our culture, if I can put it not as succinctly, but it's at least in such a way. I think is definitely a clear way to.
You're absolutely right about name changing. It's a tactic of takeover, and it's something that's well documented. I think, don't quote me on this, but I think Survive the Jive spoke about that recently. But please go on. You're absolutely right about name changing, though. It is a sign of being taken over.
Yeah, I think recently, just to add to that, another thing that has been controversy at the moment is the call to ban the old South African flag, wrongly called the apartheid flag. And basically, obviously, it's basically making the rounds on local radio and on social media, and everyone basically is debating that. The call for that, it would be banned in public. Obviously, you could still use it as private use in your own house and around poker games. But obviously, they want to basically ban it to museums, and that's basically the movement that's starting at the moment. And I mean, people can go look at our channel. We've done documentaries on like the Afrikaner enclave called Urania, where they're basically doing absolutely great work in preserving as many of these type of monuments that they can. Monuments, they've got Monument Hill, and they've got the Cook Sister Monument, and all basically giving homage to ex-presidents, and just the culture itself, and basically preserving that for future generations. So there definitely is some hope, and I think we all have to be too down and out. But
what is the new flag then? Pray tell.
Well,
is there,
go for it.
No, sure, go for it.
Okay, no, we still have the current South African flag that came about after the free and fair democratic elections in 1994. So the flag is still the same, but the issue has been raised regarding the old apartheid era flag. So what has occurred is and I suppose it's very similar to the situation in the US, for instance, when people start talking about the Confederacy flag, how the Confederacy flag is innately racist because it harkens back to a previous era where, the whole slavery debate and Confederacy versus the Union. I mean, I don't need to talk to the American audience about it because it's the stuff they know, but just to give an idea that's similar is that the old South African flag, the Oranje Blanje Blauw, was a flag that formed part, and it was representative of the Republic of South Africa, specifically to cover the united front that South Africa was, the former republics, that sort of thing. So what this flag now inherently represents, it's been brought up because there's always something to complain about, always something to bring up and create issues about, especially when the country is busy burning down. Then you start looking for irrelevant stuff to start fighting about. Is that it became an issue of censorship, whereas if you fly the flag, or if you bring it out in public, then it becomes an issue of should it be censored or not. So this went to the judicial system, and it's actually a non-issue, but it's very similar to much of the flag questions you might have in the US, for instance.
Indeed. I mean, we have, and it really, when it comes down to the Confederate flag, what we have is people acting out of malice toward those of us who cherish our history in the South. I'm a proud Virginian. And what they've done is they are using war propaganda to smear the flag. Of course, the flag, according to the anti-white narrative, means something totally different than it actually means. But since these anti-white bastards control the means of communication, they get to tell everybody what it's going to mean, despite you being the one who might be flying it. Now, if I freeze at any moment during when I'm speaking or what have you, let me know, folks, because I'm trying to figure out, I don't know if this is something that YouTube is trying to do with glitch banning. I will keep an eye on it, but I do want to read these super chats, and then I want to jump over to Mike because I want to get more of his thoughts on Annette, what he knows about friends or family, what he's planning to do in the future for her memory, and anything else he knows about what's going on, maybe even about info about Kayla. But we started off the night with a great super chat from Dainty Brighton, super chatting by way of the familiar alternative, $5. She writes, I'm sorry I'm unable to work, but I wanted to share my support here at least. Well, you're always here in spirit, and we are in spirit with you, our dear friend, and we look forward to your return. It looks like Am Solace, super chatting $10. Thank you very much for the kind investment. Thank you all for the work you do to stand up for our people. Thank you for being present and contributing with your munificence to this cause. Seven Serpents, also $10. Contributing by way of YouTube. Now, more than ever, we need to support those on the front lines. Very well said. PVD BH, super chatting $24.99. Thank you deeply for that kind investment. And writing, a dang shame what they did to the Great Order. He introduced me to Latvian folk music, and I can never repay that. Beautiful music. Wish we had that kind of community here. Love you guys. Keep up the good work. Thank you very much for that. And thank you very much for pointing out Jared's contribution. He has made many contributions, and that's why the anti-whites have decided to target him. We have a very munificent super chat from Bam Bam, super chatting by way of the familiar alternative, and super chatting $50. Thank you most dearly for that kind investment. We have the absolute best people in the entire white positive sphere, and the white positive sphere are the best people of our civilization. PVD BH back again with a 49 investment. Thank you very much. Here's another 50 for No White Guilt. You, the man, love your content and your vocabulary to use, has helped me win tons of debates with my own family. Most of them now are on our side. Can't crack my dad, though. Mom was easy. Any suggestions? I did write to you. Please reach out to me on my website, and we will talk about your dad's particular case. I assure you, though, we'll be able to get through. And thank you very much for sharing your testimony of using the lexicon and dialectics of going free and the success of using that lexicon. This is why the governments in Europe moved to prevent me and my content from reaching our people in Europe, because these dialectics work. These this lexicon works. And you will find, ladies and gentlemen, if you take up the same lexicon, you will have the same results. Bam Bam is back again with another $25 super chat and writing, keep up the great work. Thank you very much, Bam Bam.
I think Bam Bam is trying to be the crown winner this week.
I think he is. He won last week, and now he wants it back. Amanda Scott, super chatting with 10 pounds. I love your channel. Never stop, she writes. Well, we love you back. Thank you very much for the kind super chat, Amanda. I think I mentioned at the beginning of the show, ladies and gentlemen, that we have this South African effect. I think this is something that we should talk about, because in your conversation with friends, family, and strangers, if you mention that when something negative happens to our people and nothing is being said, of course, that is a hush crime, you can work in that this is the South African effect. And then they will ask you, what is the South African effect? And that opens the door to telling them about what is taking place, the butchery that is being inflicted on our people in South Africa. So, Mike, I want to hear from you. What more do you have to say on your contact with Annette moving forward? Maybe Kayla, friends of theirs. What have you learned?
Thank you very much. Yeah, I obviously I'm still learning a lot more about Annette as we move forward. Obviously, we'll continue to push her memory across the socials. I do know that one of her friends is putting together a fundraiser for a documentary about her life to spread the word about the South African effect. So I've already begun to promote that across the platforms as well, to try and raise awareness of that campaign. And I'm speaking with some of her friends. We obviously, I always continue to talk about Kayla as well. Such a tragic story, of course, that was mentioned in the previous episode that I was in back in February rather. And I'm still obviously talking to her family rather closely on a daily basis. But again, the South African effect is something that, as an example of what needs to happen, if I may raise the point, we have sitting in this stream a couple of fine gentlemen from the United States, a couple of excellent colleagues from the Boer Republic in South Africa, and myself. We need to have a global effort to assist and to raise awareness and to do things for this cause, because the voices from South Africa can only reach so far. They need to be boosted by us outside.
Indeed, we love having an international show here. I should mention as an aside to our Swedish friends, it is Sweden's National Day. I was tweeting a little about that earlier, but our thoughts and hearts are with Sweden today. And yeah, we'd love to speak to some people from Europe. We know there are those out there in Europe as well that look to South Africa and know what's going on. We're all in this together, right? And I'd actually, since it's your first time on tap, well, again, I do want to get back to Mike about anything he knows at the families and wider situation. But the guys from Boer Republic, why don't we start with you, Zener? If I'm saying that correctly, let me know if I'm not. I always like to ask people when they're on our show, how you would answer the question of why and how people of European heritage the world over, what we share, why we should care about each other, why Americans shouldn't only just think about America, why they should take an interest in what's going on in South Africa, in Australia, in Europe, and vice versa, our common heritage. It's a general question, and admittedly putting you on the spot a little bit. I know we didn't really discuss this beforehand, but if you'd like to share anything, I do always like to hear, especially when we have international guests on the show, about what it means to you to be of European heritage in general, and of course your specific heritage, more closely to South African heritage, and how we're all connected.
No, thank you. Your pronunciation is absolutely fine. It's Siner. You probably have to have a bit of the accent to get it right, but we'll get it sometime. No, thanks for the question. I think it's a great question, and I'll definitely take the first go at it, because for me it's a very, very easy question. Basically, it's everything to fight for, and the basic heritage is we're fighting for probably what I think is the best genes that the world has produced, in a sense, that we have kind of produced Western civilization, and that very much comes down to our genetic material. And just speaking of myself as well, coming from a European heritage, my ancestors coming here 300-400 years ago, fleeing oppression, and built a whole society up from nothing. And I do think if the kind of characteristics, the kind of drive, the fight for our own self-determination, that which is basically born and bred through our genetic material, that is something worth fighting for day in, day out. So for me, if I look all around the world at what white people have built, whether it be in America, in Australia, in South Africa, and obviously in Europe, I think there's just a beautiful combination of IQ, combination of certain personality traits, things that have created a world where everyone can flourish in. And so for me, it's easy to look and peer back in history and see that I don't know if this will ever be recreated. And it's a very easy thing to fight for, so that there is something to hand over to your children. So yeah, from South African descent, obviously I do, in a sense, I won't say you feel European, you do still identify as South African. We do still feel we want to build something here in South Africa, and that's what we're fighting for every day. But yeah, I think it is a concerted effort worldwide. So, I mean, to summarize that, I think, the proof is in the pudding. If you just look at what your genetic ancestry has built, I think it is almost, can call it a duty to fight and preserve and extend. I hope that answers your question.
It does, very well so, and it is a duty. Odendal, I'm sure you concur with what your colleague said. Anything you'd like to add, your own twist on that?
Well, I'm not sure I can add as much to that, because I agree wholeheartedly. It is a very easy thing to think of. It's not a nice thing to think about, but it's an easy thing to make a decision on. And that is that one has to act. Once you have the eyes to see, once you know enough to know, it should be time to act. You have a responsibility and a duty. Just to emphasize, and I know the show is a memorial show, just to emphasize the connected nature that we all have as European people with European heritage. Recently, around about, I think, between the 25th and the 27th of May this year, 2 young people were murdered in cold blood here in South Africa. And maybe this is a bit close to home, but just to give you an idea of how connected we are. The 2 names, it was 2 young people. One was 19 and the other one was 23 years old, were murdered in cold blood. They were murdered by 3 African men, and before they were murdered, they were called Umhlungu, which means white person. And the names of these 2 that I would like us to remember, along with Annette, is their names are Jessica Kuhn and Johanku Fleischmann. Now, the Kuhn and the Fleischmann are both German names, K-U-H-N or K-U umlaut H-N and Fleischmann. So just to give you an idea of how connected we are, even though we are here on the tip of Africa, there is still German heritage here. There is still Dutch heritage, Scottish, Nordic. We're all here in some way or another. We spoke with Poseidon last year regarding the prevalence of the huge influence that Greek heritage has here in South Africa. So Europe is in a small part a huge influence on the situation in South Africa, on our interconnectedness. So it's a very easy thing to decide on if you have the eyes to see and you have the will to act. And that is, I hope that adds to what Sinead has said.
Absolutely. I saw that article about the two young people as well, and they hadn't released the names at the time, so I'm glad that you mentioned them. I was aware of that story, and you're right. It is absolutely appropriate to bring them into this memorial as well. And Mike, I believe we touched on this subject when you were on in February, but it doesn't mean we can't hear from you on this as well. And not everyone in the audience today may have been in the audience back in February. So if you'd like to add any words, how that strikes you about the connections amongst all of us worldwide and what it means to you.
Yes. Firstly, I'd like to also mention that I was also aware of, obviously, that instance that was just mentioned by our esteemed colleagues at the Boer Republic in relation to those two young individuals who, I believe, ran out of fuel on the side of the highway, and they were accosted and sadly taken from us. I made mention of that on my feeds pretty much the morning after it happened, because of the time difference back here to Australia. In relation to what you just asked, yes, it's. I think we did cover this before, but we can do so again. There is an innate connectivity between us all, be us Boer or American or Australian or New Zealand or Europe. We're all connected through a common ancestry and a common heritage. And that unites us all across the world. As our friends have just said, that there's Greek, there's German, there's obviously Dutch influence in South Africa, which is an example of the global situation, but more locally. And that commonality, that unifying force between all of our different countries is a very powerful tool in our stance for white well-being, because it allows us to unite through a common banner and through a common cause, which gives us a greater strength than we would have if we stood individually.
Absolutely. Thank you. I was just fixing my setup here, but I heard everything that you said, and that's absolutely right. We often speak about that on this show. Some of the things that woke me up personally were things that were going on across an ocean, across the Atlantic Ocean. In my case, hearing about the atrocities in Europe. I mentioned earlier this early video that I had done called Build the Wall in Europe, because I was so moved by some of the stories I was hearing. So even though there was a geographical distance, there was thousands of miles between me and the people that this was happening to. There's instantly, just on a gut level, that connectivity that Mike was just speaking to, of recognizing that we are part of a larger family. We are part of a larger society and civilization together, and at some point share common roots. And all of those things that many take for granted or are trying to be obscured today, that are just second nature, that are in us. Assumptions about ways to go about socializing and what's acceptable and what's not, and what our instincts are. As Jason always says, the biospirit, a thousand different ingredients that all are just mixed up in your mentality and how you go about living your life, how you interact with the world. Yes, there's amazing variety within Europe, but there are still a lot of overarching connections, a subject near and dear to me that you've heard me talk about, and I'm going to continue to produce material on. That's all I'll say for now, but it's something that I think about a lot and try to research and try to draw lines for people, because that is something that we need to hear. We keep hearing the opposite. We keep hearing that there's no meaning to being of European descent. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't even exist, is what we're told. So we have to find what's been obscured from us, find what's been hidden from us, and connect those dots again, draw those lines again. And people are doing all kinds of work. It could be on a scientific genetic level. It could be on a historical level. more of a folk level, because history isn't just about the decisions that parliaments and kings made. It is about the experiences of the people, the folk, over the generations, what their experiences were, what their lives were like, what their stories were like, how they understood the world. The symbols, we were talking a little about symbols earlier, the symbols that meant something to them. So this is what we're piecing back together. This is maybe why some of us were attacked and taken off this platform, because some of us talk about things like this, and maybe that's scary to the powers that be. And we have to ask, why would that be? Why would that be? You know, watching nonsense on television, watching ad after ad about antidepressants and all these drugs with side effects on top of side effects on top of side effects, that's fine. But connecting the dots about our heritage, doesn't that tell you something? Hopefully that gives you some fodder. Members of our audience already know this. This is the work that we're doing. This is the tools that we're trying to give you. But Jason, I know we might not have Jason on video at the moment, but I wanted to see how you were doing, and if you had anything to say regarding what we've been discussing over the last several minutes.
Well, I definitely always have something to say about what's being done to our people in the fight for white well-being, this Western sunrise. Laura said it in a private message to me beautifully the other day, that we have to, if we're going to realize our Western sunrise, we have to weather this storm. And I thought that was poetic. It was brilliant. And I want everybody, we have some super chats here. I'm going to read them, but I want everybody to feel the same passion that I feel. I know a lot of people, with what's happening with the censorship that's sweeping through again, a lot of channels deleted, a lot of videos deleted. This sort of thing causes a lot of people to become pensive and inward looking and afraid. You should feel the opposite. You should, if you can't feel that fire, reach into me and take a bit from me. Because when the anti-whites lash out at us, I get fired up. When they delete channels, when they delete videos, I say to myself, I'm going to do more. I've talked about it before. When these things happen that infuriate you, when lives are extinguished, our sisters and mothers and fathers and brothers, when their lives are extinguished, let that be a kernel of flame in your soul that you can reach into at any time that you need it, and let it drive you to greater and greater heights of sacrifice and duty for our people, greater and greater accomplishments of sacrifice and duty and achievements for our people. It is that fire. That fire is a virtue. Tend that fire as you would tend any righteous flame. Don't allow the terrorism that the anti-whites inflict on us to deter you from standing up for our people. No, in fact, use every punch they throw as momentum to throw 10 back in their direction. Let me jump to these super chats. Joshua Randall, great friend of the show, great member of our community. And this is a community, the community for white well-being, are where things happen. This is where miracles take place. We have stars who show up in the chat in this cause. We have Poseidon showing up. We have Way of the World showing up. This is the community that is going to ride and as the vanguard and bring our people back to that place where we can recapture our destiny. Nothing, not the banning of any channels, not the deleting of any videos is going to stop us. Not the deplatforming, not the showing my face on CNN, not the people, not the scumbag, anti-white scumbags over at Huffing the Compost, saying some negative garbage about me and their pieces. None of that is going to stop us. Not some sicko pink-haired loser, not some billionaire sitting in some palace somewhere in the world is going to stop us from recapturing our destiny. And these steps they take now, these steps are the signs of their terror, because they know that the day has come that will be ours. They already see that glowing light on the horizon. That is why they panic. That is why they're taking these steps that they take today. Joshua's super chatting with $10 by way of the familiar alternative. Thank you, my good friend and sir, writing, what a blackpilling week it has been for him. The only good thing was seeing Jason and Mark finally push back on E. Michael Jones's nonsense. It's hard to see silver linings in our troubled times right now, but Jason's zeal always lifts my spirits. Amen to you. And as I say this to you, Joshua, I say to all of you, if you don't have the fire, take some of mine. If you don't have the spine, take some of mine. I will do all that I can do. And I will be out there with people like Jared George, with people like Mike. Then this is what heroes look like. I will be out there with Boer Republic. If you ever need any help or support, if you ever need any passion, you know where to find it. It's not going to be found on the channels. It's not going to be found in the personalities that are so overly delicate that they can't say anti-white, that they can't speak with a language that the anti-whites haven't already given them and told them is official and legitimate language. No, we speak with the language of truth. We speak with a language that defeats the anti-whites. Just as our good friend PVDBH was saying in his post and his super chat earlier, that he's using the lexicon, he's using the dialectics, and he has taken back his family, for God's sake. Another set of statistics showing how we are different than everybody else, or how they are more violent. Another rendition of how the hypocrisy of the anti-whites is so awful, and then ain't it bad isn't going to do anything else for us. This is what changes things. We are the people who are making a difference. And PVDBH is back again with another super chat, super chatting with $49.99. I'll definitely message you, No White Guilt. Working on it now on your website. I have a lot to say. Been a lurker for a long time, who has been able to support our people, but been scared. With recent happenings, I'm done with that. Amen to you, brother. Thank you for showing up and being a part of this. Thank you for your munificence. Every single dollar is going to go toward making the anti-whites look like garbage, look like the demons that they are. It's going to go to making sure that our brothers and sisters know the language with which to speak, to change their family and friends, to bring them over to the cause of white well-being, or finally to unmask the anti-whites for the demons that they truly are, the people who shrug their shoulders at the deaths of people like Kayla, of people like Annette, of the scores of others that Boer Republic could cite for you every month that are taking place. The South African effect in every one of our cities, in every one of our small towns. That is what we are enduring. We have Ryan Manley super chatting with $4.99, writing, keep up the intelligent work. Thank you, good sir, for your investments, for everything you have done for our people and cause. Bill O'Hore super chatting $10. Jason, their attempts to silence white positive media in South Africa, US, and Europe are proof of their desire for white erasure. They fear us. Damn straight, Bill O'Hore, another great member of our community, telling it exactly like it is. Don't allow them, ladies and gentlemen, don't allow them to say this is for the good of this little non-white family, or this is for the good of that little non-white family. Don't allow them to say it's segregation or it's apartheid. When we invite people into the civilizations that we build, they are damn well lucky to be given anything from us. So their claim that they should have been given the house that we built, the waterways that we built, the electricity that we built, is absolutely a sign that they are insolent curs. They deserve nothing from us, and ever thankful for everything that we have done. Sean Alexander, $4.99. Anger is a virtue when it protects the innocent. That is a meme curative, an MC that I shared. It's from a couple weeks ago. It is one of the powerful tools you can use. When the anti-whites, they hear me say this, when the scumbags in their gender fluid dens over at Huffing Compost decide they're going to write about No White Guilt again, they're going to say, he's angry. He's a mean person. Listen how much anger he's filled with. Well, anger is a virtue when it protects the innocent. When your family members and your friends and your strangers say, you're too angry, now is the time not to be so upset. Now is the time for peace. You recite that MC in their face and you watch them back on their heels. You watch them try to say that something should be held back in reserve of the innocent, and you will win that debate. This is a curative contagion. You spread it to those around you, and they spread it to those around them, and we take back our destiny and put an end to this deplatforming, and then we take righteous steps against those who have done to us what they have done. Because as I've said before, once we recapture our destiny, sorry is not going to be good enough. I pass it back to my guests and my colleagues so we can move forward with this fantastic show.
Well, I'd like to hear from Ziner. Some kind of rolling the R. I like that. It's kind of like Old English or Old Norse, the way you said it. It sort of reminds me of. We know that you actually have to go. You and Mike have to go in a little bit. Odendahl is going to be with us through the whole time. So let's get back to a little more about Annette and the farm murders in general. Is it just common knowledge among all of you down there that this is happening, or is this somehow are there people that deny this is happening? Is it hidden the way certain things are here in the States? I mean, to Jason's point and some of the things that he was just so passionately speaking about, as he beautifully does, part of the thing here is there's still a fair number of white people that don't realize there's a problem. They don't realize anything is going on. It's hard to imagine that would be the case in South Africa, but you're living it. We're not. So why don't you tell us a little about that? I mean, are there some people that just are there white people that think the farm murders are a conspiracy, or that it's quote unquote fake news, or is it pretty much accepted by everybody and it's more of a case of we just have to manage it and we have to figure out what we're going to do about this?
No, thanks for that. All very good questions. My first way to approach that question is it really depends on which demographic and which area you're talking about. If you go and you talk to any Afrikaner, firstly, they are more than aware, and obviously I think all farmers in the country, whether it be white, African, Indian, they're all very aware of this issue because they're all taking measurements every day to protect themselves and forming groups and things. So that's them basically. Then if you go to the larger public, or the public at large, generally most of our population is quite uneducated. There's a very large proportion that is basically unemployed. So, those are generally the people that don't really listen even to mainstream media, even less to alternative media and Twitter and this, where actually that's really where all the news happen in that sense. Generally for that demographic, they would be pretty indifferent and, pretty naive to this type of news. Then if you get to the sort of more middle class, and I think definitely most of the white population, they're very aware of this issue. And the big issue there is not whether they're aware, it's how much they're allowed to speak out. Our mainstream media is very censored, very controlled, and that's why we've obviously gone on to alternative media sources to try and get the word out. But if in private, around campfires with family, everyone is very much aware of the problem. It is just, what can you do? That is the big issue. When we go into more sort of academic circles and mainstream media circles, if you go into universities where the so-called academics live, then there is a lot of pushback. And again, in that sense, whether they are doing the pushback just for political reasons, whether they actually believe it, I think they're just doing it for political reasons. But generally, you either meet the person on the street that actually agrees with you and they know it's happening, there's nothing to do, or they're just completely ignorant. And obviously our project here is to try wake up the white population here, to try and get everyone to see what a big problem it really is. I'm just going to tell a little story that might, just give you some idea. And I think this story wouldn't have made international news. So, when I'll just talked about that two young people that got stranded on the side of the road and unfortunately killed. And a few weeks ago, or a week ago, there was a African petrol attendant who loaned a woman 100 Rand, which is about $10, just because she couldn't put enough petrol in to make it home. And then she had to come back and give him the money back because he loaned it to her. And it made such an uproar on social media. There was like a big charity, basically, and he has received about 500,000 Rand, which again is about $50,000 as sort of charity for this act of kindness. and I know it sounds very strange. It's a funny story to bring up, but this is what I truly don't. We struggle to understand what's going on in this country. You have, and again, unconfirmed, but I could probably say that most of those donating to him was white people. And in a sense, you have such a tragedy of two white people, and then a case of where a person just loans someone, $10 and gets the praise of $50,000 for doing, obviously a nice, very good act, but not something that I think has to be praised to that level. And where you think like
normal it's normal among us. That's normal among us.
Yeah, of course. But sort of, in a sense, my point is that in a sense, the majority or the majority of whites are they're kind of still, if you do like acts like that, you give money to a person you've never met in life that is not from your race, and it's a kind of a dopamine hit you're giving yourself, whereby a lot of these things are sort of misplaced. There is so much other need where this money could go for. And in a sense, what I'm saying is I feel, and obviously we experience it because we're so desensitized to the amount of farm killings and attacks and violence, is that most people just tend to just turn away and not want to face the truth because it is just so difficult to face. So in that sense, it falls back into this where people choose not to see the real danger. They choose not to see really what's going on, not because they don't know, but because the truth is very difficult to handle. So, yeah.
I want to hear the others on what you just said, but I'll just quickly mention, and this is why you heard me saying before about digging into the past, connecting the dots again for people. We need to understand ourselves in all dimensions, the ways that we're strong, but also in that the ways that we may have Achilles heels. No one is used to the huge populations and the instant communication that we have. This is something that happened faster than we were able to adapt to it. I think we're still coping with it and getting used to it. The reason I mentioned this just very briefly, I'm not the first to mention this, but Tacitus said in his Germania at a couple of different points that for the Germanic tribes in Northern Europe, to close the door on any human being was a crime. And I have to laugh at things like that when you could compare that and put that right up next to these girls holding up banners with the refugees welcome. These are our instincts. These served us well when we were in those conditions, when we were in those climates. Well, we're still largely in those climates, but when we were among our own or those who were very closely related to us, and there was an understanding of surviving together, those instincts have been perverted. And the more that we understand our long history, the instincts that come with that, the more we'll be able to make sense of the present and understand how we can better adapt ourselves to the present, still being who we are, but having it be in the context of the world that we live in and serve us rather than harm us. So that is a quick example of something from our past, right? Something that's in our instinct. Again, something that Jason would say under his great moniker, under his great term, the biospirit, that it was a crime to close the door on another person, that you just never turn someone away. Well, you can understand a little bit better. You have another piece, another glimpse into what's going on. You understand too that this doesn't just come out of nowhere. These are deep instincts and deep in our genetics that go back thousands of years. And there's reasons for these things. And they're beautiful when they serve us, but just like anything, it can be a two-edged sword, and we have to be smart about how we manage it. And the only way we can do that is if enough of us are educated and we know things like this. We have those facts at our fingertips, on the tips of our tongues to begin with. Because most of us, not you on this show, not the people in this audience, but most people out there, there's no sense of depth. We're flailing around. The only history they know is the last 20 years or 30 years of television and movies. That's not what we need. that little bit from Germania, from Tacitus, that one little hint is worth more than knowing all the movie trivia of the last several decades. That's the kind of thing that will help us make sense of what's happening right now. But as I mentioned, Mike is going to have to dip out of here in a few minutes. So, Mike, I'd like to give you an opportunity to respond to anything that's just been said. And also, if you don't have too much to add on that, I know you had some information on, you're always very good about this, on donating, on helping the causes for Annette and her memorial and the other individuals that you advocate for. So I'll turn the floor over to you for a few minutes, Mike. Whatever you'd like to share, but especially please do hit the information about how people can help.
Yes, thank you. I would like to just quickly say that I completely agree with what you've just said, Jared. We have such a wealth of history from our culture and from our heritage, and it's very important to hang on to that, especially in this exceptionally fast-paced world where everything's a microwave. We expect it immediately. We need to hang true to what we know from our past. Yes, as you've just alluded to, I will have to tap out in a few moments. But I would like to encourage anyone who is watching this stream either live or later to have a look around and find out what they can about Annette and to share things on their social media, because it's very important that we do remember her as much as possible. From all the indications I've received from people I've spoken to, she was a very beautiful, spirited individual, and her candle cannot be extinguished. Her life obviously was taken from us, but her cause, our cause, continues. I do have the fundraiser, as you did mention. I think we may already have that link, but I'll make sure it's provided. So hopefully we can get that out there to our viewers if they wish to possibly consider contributing. If not, just a simple share, just to get the net even wider. It's about her life, but it's also about the South African effect, as well as we've now termed it, to raise awareness of everything that's happening over in that country. So I'd just like to quickly say thank you very much to our fantastic and esteemed hosts for having me back on the program. I do hope to continue working with you guys and also the Boer Republic as well. I know I've only met you guys recently, but it will be fantastic to continue to work with you all. Thank you very much.
Well, Mike, I know I speak for Jason when I say that it is always an honor and a pleasure to speak to you. We honor the hard work that you do, the selflessness, the obvious depth of concern that you have. You are taking that empathy that we have, that I was explaining a moment ago, and you're funneling it the right way. You're doing it to protect your people. You're doing it to make a difference. And it's not in a way that necessarily must harm anyone else. Of course, there's a time to assert boundaries when boundaries need to be asserted. But you are just advocating for people who don't have a voice or need a voice, more of a voice, especially you're amplifying the message in Australia, far away from South Africa, but you're a node over there in Australia for this information of what's going on over there. You've been called to do it. We spoke to you more in depth when you were our guest for the whole 2 hours back in February, and I do encourage people to go listen to that episode if you want to hear even more about what makes Mike tick and why this gentleman from Australia, who, by the way, we do talk about Australia in that episode as well and the things going on there, of course, he loves and is connected to his homeland. But why this gentleman, Mike, who you see here with us, got the call and followed through on this message that he received, that he felt in his heart and his being, to serve by being this node in his nation of communicating about South Africa, of advocating for the people like Annette, like Kayla, and like so many others in South Africa. So we and all of our audience, thank you, Mike, from the bottom of our hearts. We see your integrity, and there's nothing but love and respect that we're flowing out to you and for you. We'll speak again soon. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you very much, and I hope everyone has a fantastic Thursday or Friday, depending where you are in the world.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for being here. We'll talk soon.
And likewise, Ziner, I think that you have an obligation. So anything you'd like to say in closing? I don't know how much time you have, if you have to jump right out, but I'll hand it over to you for a moment.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to make this long. No, just thanks a lot for having me on the show. It's absolutely a great honor. Just listening to you guys is very, very inspirational. We need everything we can get here in the Southern Tip. And yeah, our message is always the same for anyone in South Africa. They can always get a hold of us. We're here to try and bring all Afrikaners together and be as self-sufficient as possible. Anyone around the world who wants to support us, you can contact us on any of our social media sites. And yeah, just I'm sure Oudendal will fly the flag for the rest of the show. And just thanks a lot, guys. Would love to do this again and really appreciate all your work. And yeah, it's been a great inspiration. Thank you.
Thank you, brother. Thanks for being here.
It was great speaking to you again. Wow, we're always in close contact. We're always thinking of you down there. So always, the door's always open if you need to reach out, but we'll speak soon. Thanks for being on.
All right. Well, let's, in the final 30 minutes here, let's start it off with some super chats. Phoenix Fire doing double duty, super chatting $5. Money for the cause. Salute. Thank you so much, Miss Phoenix Fire, for the kind investment. The Real Daniel Green super chatting $2. Amen. Thank you very much for that investment in the cause for white well-being. My Animal, $2. White patriarchy has been good for humanity. I don't think there's any denying that. Thank you very much for the kind investment. We have our great friend Luke super chatting by way of the familiar alternative. And if you are interested in super chatting by way of that method, please look down into the video's description. Super chatting with $20. Didn't write anything, but thank you very much. Good sir. Phoenix Fire also super chatting again with $10 and writing love to you all, one of your moderators. Thank you so much, Phoenix, for the double duty. A pragmatic women exist, $5. Discord server Women Against Feminism, a positive, productive community to support, empower our amazing women. I'll share the link in chat. Thanks, No White Guilt. Thank you for the kind investment to the cause of white well-being and the good work we are doing here for the well-being of our people. This in an age when as I said in the intro to the show, our love can be called hate by our opposition. Our cherishing and celebrating of our history and ancestral traditions can be called evil and hatred, and therefore that be the reason given, the pretext given to eradicate everything that we love and care about. And make no mistake, ladies and gentlemen, we need the things that are the expression of our spirit to truly rise and be what we are capable of being. You cannot be in an alien world that is disharmony in its reflection back to you. When you have an environment that reflects your biospirit, there is a feedback loop that is created. It lifts you higher than you otherwise would be able to rise on your own. It is the wind that elevates you. Your wings are a product of your particular genetic architecture. Are you going to be have a fantastic memory? Are you going to be a fast sprinter? All of this is part of your genetic architecture. But the body of our people, the living, breathing, animated body of our people reflected back at us in the aggregate of those manifestations, which therefore and is called our culture. That is the wind that raises us higher than we could ever elevate ourselves. Remember that. That is why the anti-whites want to deny you everything that we create, everything that is ours, every street name that is changed, every statue that is torn down and replaced by some non-white or some anti-white, every monument, every piece of history that is burned, the pages of those books burned and rewritten to conform to the anti-white narrative. Every single one of those acts is an infliction of harm on your spirit, on my spirit, on the spirits of your babies when you look into their eyes. All of that is the infliction of harm, and keep that in mind when you see these things that you otherwise might think are trivial. The changing of the name, the changing of the boulevard's name, or the changing of the town's name. All of these things are wounds to our soul. When we take back all that is ours, we will rectify this. And then, and only then, will you truly see what Western kind, our people, is truly capable of. A united white ring around the globe, working for our well-being, celebrating the different hues of our civilizations. And that, my friends, is even beyond our comprehension. It is beyond our imagination today, but it will be something that our descendants will realize, and we will be the names that they remember in those days of glory. Roy Danton, super chatting $19.99. Another great friend, a loyal friend of our community, writing, yesterday I was mostly afraid that normal people who haven't previously seen any of those deleted channels would believe everything the anti-whites claim about them. So important it to get too frustrated about. It is. Now is the time that you double your efforts. Now is the time when they reach out and they strike us. Now is the time to reach out twice as many people on twice as many platforms. Let that be the response that they learn will come from us every time they move against us. Let them move against all of those other elements out there that are going to wither and whimper in the coming of their evil. But when it comes to us, we will be the static pole against which their waves crash. We will be the lightning that strikes back. I'll pass it over to my colleague, Jared George.
Beautifully said. The gods speak through you, Jason. Odendal, when we were together on Mark Collette's channel, I think we spoke a little about this, but I asked about the media, or asked about white people being aware a little earlier in this show tonight. What I haven't gotten to yet, and this is, as I said, what I believe we might have spoken about back in October on Mark's channel, is the South African government itself conspiring to block news about the farm murders, to obfuscate that news. So anything you'd like to share about that?
Well, this is quite relevant to what's happened yesterday, to be honest. I'm not sure. I read somewhere that yesterday was the anniversary of the storming of the beaches on Normandy, D-Day. And I might be wrong, but if I'm correct, then this is an apt look into how censorship has been,
I think it's
stormed
today. Well, it might
upon
be
us.
yesterday where you are, but it's the 6th.
Yeah.
They were preparing for it on the 5th. So
Yeah.
either way, yeah, the timing's pretty funny.
And it's interesting that this parallel, how censorship has been thrusted upon us. You know, we are at this precipice, and it seems as if it's clamping down even more. Internet censorship, basically the muffling of alternative opinions to the mainstream media in a large way. And it's unfortunate to hear about your channel. And I mean, there are so many other channels who have been affected. Ours is but a small channel, but if the larger channels' voices get extinguished, ours goes down with it. That's why alternatives like BitChute is useful. You've got BitChute. We've also got a BitChute channel as a backup, because one can't be too careful in times like these. The situation, and this is again another parallel to our own situation here in South Africa, is that censorship is rife. The South African Broadcasting Corporation is tied to the government in certain respects. So what happens is there is usually quite a bit of a clampdown. You've essentially got 3 to 4 main channels if you don't have satellite television. 3 to 4 main channels that are free and are obviously monitored to quite an extent. Lots of diversity. You've got a channel in that would cater to African languages, and then two others that would be more or less oriented towards English and Afrikaans speaking, but those are diversified beyond beyond recognition, and then sort of a more unilateral, democratic, free one, ETV. But the point being is those channels are heavily monitored, those are heavily influenced. So you won't necessarily find in the evening news reports on what we've been discussing, at least not into too much detail. There's a specific instance that I want to mention now, which is relevant to this. But just to add a bit more background to your question, the specific instances of governmental control that I can think of, a few years ago, we had an instance where when Jacob Zuma was still president, there was quite a few instances where things in Parliament happened, or where things were said in Parliament, and issues of corruption, issues of where the state got involved and essentially tried to clamp down on information getting out. Journalists were prevented from releasing info. This still happened under Jacob Zuma's rule. Even PewDiePie, within this week, about a day or two ago, released a video where he was mocking Jacob Zuma's inability to count. So if we can get more and more alternative media sources out there bringing attention to the South African effect, the greater the chances are of the world waking up to what is essentially their future if they don't change course. And I'm talking about Europe, I'm talking about the UK, Australia, New Zealand, the US, the Western world at large. We need to wake up because the experiment was foisted upon us 25 years ago, 30 years ago. We were convinced into giving up what our ancestors had built up. I want to bring your audience's attention to a previous show that you did with the lovely Porridge. And in this specific live stream or discussion, there was something very valid that was asked. It was, how do we know, what are the warning signs that show us that our civilization is on the point of, say, the South African effect? When I was listening to that show, the first thing that came to mind, and he talked in depth, the lovely Porridge talked in depth about how sport has affected or partially affected the downfall of Australia. Many years ago, before the 1994 elections, before the referendums were held, before Nelson Mandela was released, before any of the Rainbow Nation, and there's the rainbow symbol again, before we were exposed to this diversity experiment, there was sanctions put on South Africa. And this is more anecdotal, but I hear many of my forebears talking about this, is that South Africans love sport. We are a very sporty and competitive nation, and we were so for essentially the 20th century, heavily sporty and competitive. One of the big issues that we faced, and rugby is quite popular here, much in the way that American football is over there by you guys. One of the big influences of trying to convince us to end apartheid or to end self-deterministic behavior was putting a clampdown on our ability to compete internationally. This was something that was brought up in the lovely Porridge's discussion in terms of in the Australian context. But this harkens back to the way that our civilization crumbles when you've essentially got bread and circuses distracting the masses while the empire or the civilization crumbles around you. That's one sign. That's one indication where, for instance, you've got the Super Bowl distracting the masses about what is essentially vapid entertainment. We have similar instances here, and that was our downfall back then. So that's a clear warning sign. That's all. that's actually already too late. Regarding the censorship issue, in this week, there was another valid case, and Annette might have been aware of this when she was alive, was that a farmer, Stefan Smit, last year he was threatened with land grabs multiple times. He had people, land grabbers, there's this issue of land expropriation without compensation. In other words, the government wants to take what they term as white-owned land. And it is essentially a large portion of the ANC's ideals at the moment, as well as the EFF and Black First Land First, all of them Marxist communist organizations. Stefan Smith's farm, it was a vineyard. This specific vineyard in the Cape, Louisenhof Vineyard, was under target for being expropriated. Land grabbers came and put up shacks, and on video, these land grabbers came and they were quoted on video as saying that if someone has to die during these land grabs, then so be it. This is the common ideal amongst many politicians. This is the common ideal amongst many common folk that are promised things and are told so by political leaders. Now, just this month, on the 2nd of June, Stefan Smit, who was under constant threat of murder, his life was threatened, his family was threatened, he had to get bodyguards. That still wasn't enough. He was threatened with land invasion, and now the 2nd of June, he was attacked in his home. There were perpetrators, about 3 to 4 perpetrators who came into his house, murdered him in cold blood. And he was only one person in a list of many who have been murdered in the process of this ideology that they refer to as land expropriation without compensation. What's significant about this case, and this doesn't detract from what we're trying to bring attention to with Annette and with many other names, but what was significant about this case, despite the mass censorship in South Africa, despite the worldwide mass censorship of the situation in South Africa, and maybe even the immigrant crisis and many other instances where white well-being is threatened, is that Tucker Carlson specifically mentioned this case of Stefan Smit not a day or two ago, mentioned that Stefan Smit was murdered, and he specifically stated that in Tucker's own words, that it has to do with racial hatred, and that the motivation is ideologically driven. So I'm not sure if we are making significant headway, although I do feel we are. But the more headway we make, platforms like YouTube, like Twitter, Facebook, are making even more. The harder we push, the harder they push back. And unfortunately, you've experienced this now, Jared. This is the case. We are in a fight for, essentially, on the beaches of information. This is our Normandy. And although that was an unfortunate case where Europeans were fighting Europeans, and that shouldn't happen again. No more brother wars, as they say. But farm attacks, farm murders, if farmers here in South Africa are murdered, that means there's less and less people who are able to feed upwards of 60 to 70 million people. Whites are a minority, between 3 and 5 million out of that number. We are the largest tax-paying base in this country. And yet, and this isn't something you'll just easily find. I mean, you can Google it, but this is just to give you an idea of the corruption we face. We currently have a new Minister of Justice, Ronald Lamola, of the ANC, and he is now our honorable Minister of Justice. I mean, that word alone, we've spoken about the power of words, that word alone should indicate some semblance of gravity. In this case, he has been quoted as saying that the blood of white people must flow in South Africa. And this was stated in 2012. In the same way, our president, Cyril Ramaphosa of the ANC, went on an international stage. He went overseas. This is something we desire, is to have representatives. We've had a few representatives. Simon Roche was overseas. We've had Ernst Roets of AfriForum, he and Kali Kriel. Ernst Roets was actually on Tucker Carlson's show to talk about the issues here. And that has made a huge impact, but it's still not enough. Our own president went overseas. He stood in front of, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say it, but members of the Trilateral Commission, things like that, entities of that nature, went in front of them and said that no whites are being murdered on farms, that there are absolutely zero farm attacks. This tonight's show should be evidence that there are farm attacks, that there are whites being murdered on farms, because we are honoring Annette, we are honoring Stefan Smith and Kayla Meyer, all these other names that shouldn't be forgotten. This is happening. And just to give you an idea of that censorship, and I hope that maybe explains it more in detail, even our own president denies the reality of this situation on an international stage.
I have one more big question I want to ask then. And I want to hear from Jason after you, Odendel. What would you say to someone who hears about your president denying this, who hears about the Minister of Justice saying things like, white blood must flow? This is what you just said really struck me. And the prominence of the farm murders. Let's say someone doesn't deny any of that. They see it in South Africa just as clearly as we do. They don't deny it. But they say that in a place like the United States or Europe or Australia, it could never get that bad because you're on the dark continent. You're on the African continent. And your parliament, your government structures now, it's taken over by the people of African descent. And we know the history. We know that your ancestors developed lands where there were not African tribes. But be that as it may, you're still ultimately, you're in Africa. What would you say to someone that pushes back and says, you're in Africa, there are African politicians filling the parliament? There's violence in the inner city in the United States. There's hate crimes against whites, but it would never get like that. When people say South Africa is a glimpse of our future, that's maybe a bridge too far. It sounds like hyperbole. What would you say to someone who pushes back with that kind of language? First, Odendel, please, and then I really want to hear Jason on this too.
No stress. The quickest answer, or the most succinct answer I can say to that, is demographics. Just simply demographics. To elaborate on that, South Africa, I've mentioned the population dynamic we have, the demographic dynamic. Simon Roche has previously mentioned the way, the rate of increase of population. So, for instance, say between 1950 and 1994, the eightfold population increase of the native, or not, well, the Africans that were in South Africa at the time, how their demographics increased on an exponential rate. Now, that sort of demographic dynamic, that the way that would increase is not uncommon for the third world or for any other nation that has that same ideal. So if you look at Europe, the current crisis at the moment is the immigration issue. Why is there an immigration issue? You have, where the context of demographics is concerned, you have whites that aren't making replacement rate, and you have people coming in that are bringing in their families and making, 4 to, this is not hyperbole, but I mean, between 4 and 8 children per couple, and then they marry multiple wives. This is also the case here in South Africa. I've mentioned Jacob Zuma. He's got, I don't know, like 11 wives or something. Don't quote me on that, but you can count them on 2 hands, the amount of wives he has, at least. So this is not uncommon for the people who are moving into the Africans, those from the Middle East that are moving into Europe, that are moving into America, Australia. I mean, of all places, Australia. I mean, so far removed, Australia, New Zealand. That being said, there's also a huge South African community in Australia and New Zealand, expats. There are expats in the UK, in America, in Europe. To bring that point home is that if you just look at the way that, say, white Americans replace their population, and you compare it to the way that the larger population of African Americans, for instance, in Chicago and Detroit, might replace their population, you don't have a decent correlation. You don't have a good replacement correlation. So eventually you will be overrun. Although it's a much larger country, your population is much larger, more widespread. South Africa is just a small biome or a small petri dish for this tactic. In Europe, it's also, once Europeans are overrun, where do they go to? They've got nowhere else to go to. Whereas those who come from other countries have elsewhere to go back to. And it's the same. The whites here in South Africa, we don't have anywhere to go to. It's fine. You can say, okay, but go to Australia, go to New Zealand, go to Europe, go to the US. It's so phenomenally expensive for the average white South African to be able to go overseas, to be able to go. And not everyone has the means. And those that are there, they have been able to do so. But the government also makes it so incredibly difficult to get out, because you are a taxpayer. You actually fund your own demise in this country. And it's the same in the US. It's the same in Europe. I mean, you pay taxes, you pay social grants, you pay for all these programs that enable what is essentially leeches on a social system to feed, to clothe their families, to make more people. You're essentially paying for your demographic replacement. It's just not advertised to you that way. And it wasn't advertised to us that way back then. But now we see the effects of it 30 years onwards. That's the long version of essentially demographic replacement.
No, we wanted to hear your thoughts on this. I think it's really important for those outside of South Africa to hear your view, both looking out and also the progression over the decades. It's something we've spoken about. We spoke about with Simon on the warning signs, some of with Parge in broader sense, as you were speaking about earlier as well. So Jason, I know you must have things to say about this. So my question again, what do you say to those briefly who say, I mean, this can't happen. You're not going to have like a whole third world Congress and Senate in the United States. Something would have to give before we got to that point. Maybe there are some lessons we can take from South Africa, but again, to say this is our future if we don't stop, isn't that hyperbole? What do you say to the person that pushes back on that? Make them see this, Jason. I know you're going to paint a picture for us.
Well, I would say, spoken just like the short-sighted and gullible members of our people in South Africa, the days, months, or years before they found themselves tied to a chair, having drill bits driven into their chest while kept alive, having wrought iron rods set ablaze and then laid on their flesh, spoken just like those whites who were forced to sit there and watch their wives and their little girls being raped by these monsters who had driven themselves into their homes, invaded, to the absolute disconcern or unconcern of the local police department, and then spoken just like the whites, as when those crimes then were drawn up by the police department as robberies gone wrong, after the bodies had been butchered, after the people had been kept alive for hours to endure the torture, the kinds of things that these monsters do for us. I would say to such people who say that that couldn't happen here, I would say the non-white anti-whites who are already here are already demanding and calling for white blood in the mainstream media, not just all over Twitter, not just all over their social media platforms, and they are allowed to do it, but they are physically doing it. Like 2 years ago when they dragged that handicapped young man back to an apartment and scalped him and made him lick a toilet bowl. This is the state we are in across the West when we are still numerically superior to the monsters that want to replace us. Once they have a numerical majority, how quickly will things become every bit, if not worse, than what we see in South Africa today? White faces in our government mean nothing. They do nothing for us. They serve no bit of white well-being. They are as anti-white as any other anti-white of any other shade or any other religion. And they too will be excluded when that time comes. So that's what I would say. When the non-whites today, the anti-white non-whites today, talk about our status shifting to a numerical minority, they talk about it as a day of reckoning. And you, the person who would say that it's a bit too far, it's a bridge too far to say that South Africa and the South African effect is our future, you are going to suffer the consequence of that short-sightedness. You are going to be the ones who are tied to the chairs while the monsters defile your loved ones as they burn and scorch and murder the people you care most about. That's what I would say to such short-sighted fools, because that absolutely is already the case in our major cities. It is already the case in New York and Chicago. It is already in the papers, the gang rapes and the murders and the drugs that are being pushed upon our people, the mistreatment, the denial of rights, the denial of your right to associate, the denial of your right to apply for a job, the legality of denying you entrance to a university, denying you a promotion on the basis of your race. That is already a reality for us. How much worse will it be with every passing day as more of these anti-whites increase in numbers, as our honorable guest was just saying, exponentially at our expense? We fund their breeding. That is the future that we can expect from our anti-white elites in these countries. I want to read these final super chats before we get final thoughts from both my esteemed colleague and our guest. Phoenix Fire, super chatting another $5 in writing. I would put forward we could exercise our instincts, but redirect them toward each other instead of abroad. We need some self-care and self-correction. Thank you again for the double duty, Phoenix. Machiavelli sucks, $1.99, writing, Hail Goys, great to see you, brother, in the chat. Syrup doing double duty, super chatting £5. Thank you for being here, Syrup, and writing, white nepotism. Amen to that. Let's only take care of our own people from here forward. The thing we were always charged of doing and never did, we're now going to do and take back our destiny. Bill Ahora, super chatting with $5. Bill Abora, do you remember the heavyweight fighter Gary Cotees? And I guess that would be a question for Odendahl. I have no recollection of who that is. And then we will get, as you're speaking, brother, tell us where folks can find you, what you are working on, what you will be doing next. I turn the mic over to you.
Thanks for that. I appreciate it. I must admit the name escapes me at the moment, but we've had quite a few famous boxers over the years. So I apologize if I can't comment on that one specifically. There's always so much to say and always such little time. We focused this show this evening on Annette and on other names that have suffered from attacks like these, suffered from what is essentially anti-white ideology. We previously did a video detailing, and this is relevant to the monument question earlier, we did a video talking about the Wall of Remembrance. This is a monument situated in Boer, which is in the Free State province, and this specific video is focuses on the specific monument where it is a bastion for those that to honor those that have fallen while serving the agricultural community. It is a non-political effigy or a non-political association that does this, the Henneman Farmers Association. And each province is represented on a wall that has the names and the dates that they were murdered during farm attacks. There are names, it's mostly white names, but there are names of non-whites too. So that's why there's this non-political affiliation. But next year, this time, Annette Kennealy's name will probably be on one of those walls, on the Limpopo wall, Limpopo province. Stefan Smith's name will be in the Western Cape's wall, on the Western Cape's wall. The other names that we've mentioned, Kayla Meyer, her name might not be on those walls, but her name will live on in our memories and in our hearts. So feel free to check out that video that we did last year, the monument to the victims of farm murders, just to give a bit more context to what we've discussed this evening. Our links, we are on YouTube, Boer Republic, on Twitter, on Gab, on Minds. We are on BitChute as well. We do have a Facebook group, although it's not very active, but do find us on Facebook if you are inclined to be on that platform. We also have a Telegram operation. We want to have sort of a notification set up on Telegram soon, so we'll be looking into that. We also are building up a Discord server for those that are on Discord. We're usually quite careful about Discord since it's not a very safe platform. At the moment, there aren't many other alternatives that the larger populace of South Africans would be comfortable using. So we're looking into that as an option. That invite link I can perhaps send in a private chat to be added to the video later. But these are the platforms where you'll generally find us. We also have an email address, boerrepublic@protonmail.com. Please feel free to contact us. I've been in the process of interacting with many of the people that have reached out to us over the months. We have been swamped, so I apologize if we haven't got to you as soon as we'd like to. We are a small operation, basically a two-man operation, and please bear with us if we don't get to you immediately, but we will do what we can to answer questions, or if you feel like reaching out. I think that's the general gist of where we are at, or where we can be found. And as alternative platforms grow, as alternative platforms improve, we will reach out to those as well. We will make sure our presence is there, because Jared and Jason, you've seen how the Vox ad apocalypse has affected YouTube censorship. Facebook is censoring, Twitter is censoring. You know, it won't be long before we are completely kicked off of these platforms, and the larger channels talking about the issues in the West will be affected, and thus the South African voice, the South African issue, the South African effect won't get the attention it deserves.
Well said. Thank you for appearing with us today, and we'll definitely have you back. Jared, please, sir, go right ahead.
Well, the question of where can we find you is the answer to that is a little different this week than weeks past, isn't it, folks? I do encourage people to go to the contact page on my website if they want to see a listing of all of the social media platforms, both the big ones and the alternative ones, and ways to contact me. I've shared that in the chat today. As I mentioned earlier, I was just using an account that says Jared in the chat. The avatar is a picture from the Alps. That is not an account to follow. That is not going to be made into a new YouTube channel of mine. So it's just for the purposes of being in the chat. I will keep you posted as to what I want to do about YouTube. And I'm sure that there will be other opportunities to speak a little more in depth about the situation. But the main thing is, as I said at the beginning of the show, and I'll say here at the close, the wheels go on, the wheels keep turning, we're working. We had TAP today and nothing changed. You see that? I didn't do this, I didn't get into this to be a YouTuber per se. YouTube is a platform. It's one of the aspects of my public life. And then, of course, there's things I do privately as well. Where this all begins is an oath that I made and decisions that I came to before I put my website live, before I put one thing on YouTube or any other social media platform. I know what I'm doing and I know why I'm doing it. And when hurdles are thrown your way, like what happened yesterday, getting this news that I was taken off, my first instinct, and this is not to downgrade, so please don't take this the wrong way, the many hours of work and effort and love that I put into my YouTube channel. And I still have all of those videos. I mean, they're on BitChute. I might put them on my website, embed them straight on my website. Maybe there'll be a new YouTube channel. Who knows? So it's not like the work is lost. But as much as I honor that work, I hope you can understand when I say this. This is the God's honest truth. When I got the email from YouTube, I laughed, okay? I laughed. That's the right response. It's another day on the adventure. I knew that there would be ups and downs, and I'm living out why I'm here on Earth, okay? This is the time in history I was born into. I feel an immense call of purpose and duty and honor to serve, setting things to rights in the way that I can, to bringing harmony back to the world in the way I can, and specifically, of course, through the lens of my own heritage and what's being done to peoples of European descent, of redressing those grievous imbalances in my time that I'm given here in this life. So that is where it starts and that is where it ends. The energy inside, the call of the spirit. YouTube was just one of the ways that that manifests. And again, not to say I won't be back on YouTube with my own channel. I'll let you know what's happening. But I'm excited because it's making me think in new ways. It's making me perhaps look at projects or ideas more seriously, other ways to spread the message, other ways to spread what I'm learning, other ways to connect with people. I think we're all going to have to understand that we're all nodes in this. Maybe there will be something that's a little more decentralized. Certain content creators like myself maybe will send a lot of you video files and you'll all put them on your channels. And it doesn't matter if some of those are tiny, tiny, tiny little channels, but the same video is out, all these different places. People can still, if they search a certain term or the great order, let's say, it would come up. There's all kinds of things that we can do. There's all kinds of clever ways to circumvent this that I'm discussing with people. So when the will is there and you know why you're doing something, nothing can take that away from you. I actually feel energized by this. When you're on the path of your destiny and something like this happens, you don't flinch. It's just, okay, this is interesting. Are we going to go through it, over it, under it, around it? That's it. That's my message to you. I love all of you. I love the support I've gotten. If, as I said in the beginning, if you've messaged me and I haven't gotten to you yet, I will, but I've gotten love and support these last 24 hours from around the planet, and it's been absolutely amazing. And I truly thank you all for that. Odendal, I thank you for what you're doing with your friend Zinar in South Africa, and we're always thinking of you. And Jason, you are my brother. It is an honor and a joy to ride with you. As I said in a tweet yesterday, we're doing what we're here to do. I'm so glad we met. This all means the world to me, and we're just putting one foot in front of the other every day. I love you, brother. Please take us out.
Thank you, good sir, and I much love in return, Jared. Folks, first thing I want to do is I want to shine a special spotlight on my co-host Jared George for everything that he is doing for white well-being, for having the passion he has, for bringing all that he does to this service to our people and our future generations, the recapture of our destiny. A big salute to my good friend. A big salute to Jared also for all of the hard work he does to help bring TAP to you all as an entertaining and an edifying experience. So thank you, Jared, for that. I also want to thank a slew of moderators who were here today. I think we had Syrup, we had Spartan, we had Phoenix, we had HB, we had Pravada even with us. Wonderful to see you all. Fantastic having you here with us in this rapidly growing community for white well-being, which hasn't even let up an ounce. With all the censorship, things continue to churn forward. The engine continues to rumble, and we continue to build speed. So it is a wonderful thing to be able to serve with you all. Thank you all for being here. Let me make sure I get a couple of spotlights on people I saw in the chat today. I saw, of course, Bill O'Hora. I saw Jennifer P. I saw Hustle. I saw Ryan Manley. We had a late super chat as well from American Life of $5. Thank you very much for the kind super chat. Writing WPWW, great stream. Thank you very much for that. And I want to let you all know as we head out here, the final words, that Jared and I have a long scheduled, nothing to do with the censorship going on right now. It's been long scheduled week that we are going to take off. So this coming week, there will not be a tap. This is long scheduled, has nothing to do with anything else going on. And we will summer slew of guests, all stars to bring to you. It's going to be a fantastic summer for all of us, and we expect to see you all back here. It's been fantastic to speak with you all in the chat, to speak with you all here over the microphone. Thank you all for participating in the live chat, in the thread below the video once we go into replay. And a big thank you, heartfelt thank you to everyone who super chatted today. Your love, your kindness, your munificence, whether it's in dollars, whether it's in the time you spend building sites, marketing material as HB does. I thank you all for it. It is the breath and the life that makes this white well-being something very different from what has gone before. And we look forward to seeing you all again next time.